Imagine a country where up to 90% of the entire national income comes directly from foreign aid.
Right, just an absolute flood of global cash.
Yeah, I mean, by all conventional laws of economics, you'd think that country should be modernizing at breakneck speed.
You really would.
You'd expect to see, brand new infrastructure, booming industries, and
Souls.
exactly schools popping up on every corner. But then you look at the actual data for primary education, and you realize something like 85% of the children aren't even in them.
It's a staggering reality.
It really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into the data behind this ultimate economic paradox. We are looking at Somalia.
And this data, it completely defies our fundamental assumptions about how global development actually works.
Right, because looking at this, we have to ask a very blunt question. How is it physically possible to pour that much money into a system literally making up the vast majority of the nation's wealth and not even get a functioning primary school network out of it?
Where does all that money go?
Yeah, exactly. Make it make sense for me.
Well, to answer that, we have this really fascinating stack of data to go through today. And I have to say, the format of the source material we're looking at is just incredibly striking.
Oh, the presentation itself. Yeah, it's intense.
It really is. It's this customized 15-part academic data presentation, and it is strictly minimalist.
Yeah, there are no distracting colors, no fancy 3D graphics trying to spin a happy narrative.
Right. It's just pure, unvarnished data logic set against these stark white backgrounds.
Yeah.
And the designer notes are very specific, like slide 1, the hook we just talked about.
Yeah, the visual is brutal.
It literally asks for a massive flat 90% to represent the peak aid, sitting right next to a tiny 15% for child school enrollment.
And there's this red circle around the 15% with a huge exclamation mark, just really hammering home how anti-intuitive this is.
Exactly. It forces you to confront this really uncomfortable reality. To figure this out, we have to look past the top-line dollar amounts that get announced at those big international donor conferences. Right.
We have to look at the actual machinery of the country. And the presentation lays out a 4-part framework for this.
Yeah, I'm looking at the flow chart for it now. It's just 4 gray blocks connected by arrows.
Right. It outlines the causal logic. We start with macroeconomics, what they call the illusion of growth.
Then we move to human capital, which is the stagnant base.
Exactly. Then the labor market, representing fragile livelihoods. And finally, the root of it all, the institutional governance vacuum.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the macroeconomics. Because if you just glance at a spreadsheet, you might actually think things are improving, right?
That is exactly the trap. The data actually shows periods where the gross domestic product, the overall GDP, is growing.
Yeah, we're seeing years where it bounces back by 7% or more.
Right.
Now, if I'm a policymaker and I see a 7% GDP growth rate, I'm popping champagne.
Yeah.
That looks like a massive success story.
It looks like the aid is working.
Exactly. It makes it look like the country is taking off. But it's an illusion. GDP just measures the total size of the economic pie. But what actually matters to a human being trying to survive and, build a life is the size of their individual slice.
Right. How much wealth is actually reaching the people on the ground.
Exactly. And the data, specifically the dual axis chart they use here, requires us to strip away inflation and account for the sheer number of people being added to the population every year.
Oh, the gray dashed line on the chart.
Yes. When we look at that gray line, the GDP per capita, calculated in constant local currency units, the picture changes entirely.
It's basically a flat line.
It is a flat line. In some of the periods covered here, the per capita wealth is actually declining. The economic growth is completely diluted by the massive population base.
Wait, I need to push back on this a little bit. If billions of dollars are flowing in and the overall GDP is going up by 7%, money's clearly changing hands, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, construction workers are getting hired to build NGO headquarters. People are buying food in the local markets. Drivers are being hired. How does that wealth just evaporate before it hits the average person's pocket?
It comes down to the mechanism of what economists call growth without development. It's basically a phantom expansion.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's trace a hypothetical dollar of aid. That money comes in, usually in foreign currency, and it sparks immediate economic activity. You're right. Someone gets hired to drive a truck, or a local market sells imported food to an aid agency.
And that transaction gets recorded so the GDP goes up.
Right. But the key is what happens next.
Does it trickle down?
No, because there is no internal capital accumulation. The money isn't being used to build sustainable domestic industries. It's
Yeah.
not building a factory that will produce goods for the next 20 years. It's not funding intellectual property or tech startups. The money is used for immediate consumption, usually of imported goods, and then it leaves the local economy just as fast as it entered.
So it's like paying off your credit card with another credit card to buy groceries.
That's a great analogy.
You have food in the fridge for the week, your financial activity looks really high on paper, but your actual net worth hasn't increased a single cent. The wealth is a statistical illusion.
Exactly. The overall pie is getting bigger, but the money isn't sticking around long enough to build the bakery.
Wow.
And the reason for this brings us to a staggering number in the data. The slide with the area chart shows this perfectly. The reliance on external aid is absolute.
Yeah, looking at this chart, it's wild. You see the net official development assistance, the ODA, jumping from a baseline of around 10% of gross national income, just skyrocketing.
Right. It spikes up to 40%, 50%, and then those extreme years where it literally breaches 90%.
90%. I just want you, listening right now, to try and map that onto your own life.
It's hard to even conceptualize.
It really is. Imagine if 90% of your annual income didn't come from your job, your investments, or your own labor, but was just handed to you by an outside entity.
You'd have zero control over your own financial destiny.
Exactly. You are entirely at their mercy. If they pull the plug, you have nothing.
And that extreme vulnerability is compounded by what is happening to the population itself. Because if the per capita wealth is flatlining, we have to look at the denominator of that economic equation.
The capita, the sheer number of people.
Right. The demographic data in our sources is arguably the most intense pressure point in this entire analysis.
Yeah, the minimalist population pyramid they use for this slide is really striking. The base is just massive.
We are looking at an explosive, sustained population growth rate. It maintains a rapid pace of 2.5% to over 4% annually.
4% annual growth is astronomical.
It really is. A population growing at 4% will double in size in less than 18 years. But the real shock isn't just the speed of growth. It is the age distribution, the shape of the society. The data indicates that children aged 0 to 14 make up a massive 44 to 47% of the total population.
Okay, hold on. I know a lot of people might hear that and think it's actually a massive advantage.
Oh, sure, the demographic dividend argument.
Exactly. We constantly hear about the aging populations in places like Japan, Italy, or the US being this looming crisis because there won't be enough young people to work and pay taxes.
Right.
We hear economists talk about how a massive generation of kids will eventually become this energetic workforce that drives an economic boom. So why does this data frame a young population as a vulnerability?
Because a youth bulge only becomes a demographic dividend under very specific conditions.
Which are?
They have to survive, they have to be educated, and the economy has to be structured to absorb them into productive jobs. If those conditions aren't met, you don't have a dividend, you have a socioeconomic pressure cooker.
So it's all about what the state can actually provide for them.
Exactly. We have to look at the dependency ratio.
What does that look like on the ground, like mathematically?
Think about the mechanics of human development. For the first 15 years of life, a human being is a pure consumer of resources.
Right, they don't produce anything yet.
Exactly. They don't produce capital. They require pediatric health care. They require thousands of meals. They require clothing, shelter, and ideally, schooling.
Yeah.
So when nearly half of your entire population falls into that consumption category, who is providing all those resources?
The adults, the working age population.
Right. But because the children make up nearly half the population, the mathematical burden on those working adults becomes crushing. Literally, every single 2 people includes 1 dependent child.
So every working adult is carrying an enormous demographic weight.
Yes, whatever fragile state resources exist are just instantly overwhelmed.
So instead of a dividend, it's a tax, an invisible structural tax on the working population. The needs of half the country are fundamentally outstripping the productive capacity of the other half.
That is exactly what is happening. It's a pressure cooker.
Huh?
And a pressure cooker needs a release valve.
Right.
In a stable society, that release valve is the public education system and a diversified job market. You take that youth bulge, you process them through schools to give them skills, and they enter the workforce to relieve the pressure.
But the data shows us that this transition is exactly where the system violently breaks down.
Yes. Which brings us to the most alarming reality in this entire stack of data, the human capital metrics.
Right. We have millions of children being born into this pressure cooker. What actually happens to them when the baseline systems of a society fail?
Well, the first hurdle they face isn't getting a job. It's simply staying alive.
God, yeah. Slide 6 is rough. It uses this waffle chart format.
Yes, the matrix of 100 little icons.
Right. And it highlights the health data. It reveals an extreme loss of life before human capital can even begin to form. The foundational base of society is crumbling at the source.
Under 5 mortality claims tens of thousands of children annually.
And the danger extends to the mothers, too.
It does. For women, the lifetime risk of maternal death is incredibly high. The data shows it ranging from a 1 in 11 to a 1 in 30 chance during certain periods.
I want to make sure we don't just gloss over that as another statistic.
That's terrifying.
It really is. A 1 in 11 chance of maternal death. If you are a woman in this demographic cohort, the biological act of continuing the population carries a near 10% risk of death over your lifetime.
That's exactly why the presentation designer used those black icons in the waffle chart to really emphasize the extremity of it. It is a profound systemic failure of basic medical infrastructure.
And we have to consider the cascading effects of that, right?
Absolutely. When a mother dies, the survival and development outcomes for her surviving children plummet. The family unit destabilizes.
It's a domino effect?
Yes. This is what we mean when we talk about the destruction of human capital before it can even be utilized.
But let's look at the children who do survive, the ones who make it past age 5 and become part of that massive 47% youth bulge.
Right, the ones who need that release valve.
Exactly. You mentioned they need schooling. What does the data say about their access to education?
It's practically non-existent as a universal public good.
The bar chart on slide 7 shows this massive gray area.
Yes, the adjusted net primary enrollment sits at a devastating 14% to 19%.
That is unbelievably low.
And for girls, it's even lower, roughly 10% to 15%.
So if we just do the inverse math there, over 80% of children are completely outside the education system.
Over 80%.
8 out of 10 kids are never stepping foot in a classroom to learn basic reading, writing, or math.
That is the reality. The vast majority of the next generation is growing up without any formal instruction.
You know, if human capital is the operating system of a country, the software that allows a society to organize, to innovate, to interface with the global economy, then this country is being forced to run without one.
That's exactly.
It's an entire lost generation forming right before our eyes.
It's a structural lockout.
Yeah.
You literally cannot run a modern value-added economy on an uneducated workforce.
No, you can't.
Without primary education, that youth bulge and matures into adulthood. Without the cognitive tools required to become, engineers, accountants, software developers, or even modern administrative workers.
They are fundamentally excluded from the global market.
Exactly. But here's the thing. They still have to eat. They still have to survive.
Right, which means they have to work whether they have an education or not. So what happens when a massive, incredibly young, completely uneducated population enters the workforce? Where do they go?
They go to the only sector that can absorb unskilled manual labor at that scale. The employment data shows a massive, overwhelming concentration of the workforce in primary agriculture.
Okay, and when we say primary agriculture in this context, we aren't talking about like GPS-guided tractors, industrialized supply chains, and massive corporate farms, are we?
Not at all. We are talking about subsistence farming and pastoralism. Nomadic herding. We are talking about raw, human physical labor applied directly to the earth and to livestock. The economy has lacked any real industrial upgrade. It is almost entirely dependent on natural conditions.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
Agriculture is the bedrock of human civilization. People have survived and even thrived on agriculture for millennia. So why does this specific data framework flag this agricultural dominance as a critical structural vulnerability?
Because of the type of employment it represents and the total lack of an economic safety net.
How so?
Well, the data categorizes a massive portion of this workforce, 46 to 51%, as being in vulnerable employment.
Break down what vulnerable employment actually means in this setting. Like, what does the 100% bar chart on slide 9 actually represent for a real person?
It includes unpaid family workers or self-employed individuals operating entirely in the informal economy.
Okay.
It means they don't have an employer, they don't have a legally protected wage, they don't have health insurance, severance pay, or any state-sponsored Social Security.
None of it.
None of it. They are working day to day, season to season, purely for survival.
So it's like the absolute extreme edge of a gig economy, but with zero legal protections and your literal life on the line.
Exactly. And this is why the concentration in primary agriculture is so dangerous. It raises an incredibly urgent question. What happens when the primary input for your entire economy, the weather, fails?
Right, because if you are relying on rain to feed your goats or water your crops, what happens when the climate turns against you?
It causes complete economic collapse at the individual level.
Yeah.
The data notes severe droughts recorded in the region.
Yeah.
The single-pillar economy has zero resilience against climate shocks. Think about how this works in a diversified economy.
Okay.
If a severe drought hits a developed nation, the agricultural sector takes a hit, food prices might go up, but the industrial and service sectors keep churning.
Right. Life goes on for most people.
And the government can use tax revenues from those other sectors to provide relief or subsidies to the farmers.
The blow is cushioned by the rest of the economy.
Precisely. But here, there is no buffer.
Wow.
When a drought hits, it doesn't just mean higher prices at the grocery store. It means the pastoralist's herd dies. Their absolute source of income and wealth simply vanishes into the dry earth.
That's devastating.
And because half the labor force is in this vulnerable category, a drought immediately pushes millions of people over an economic cliff simultaneously.
And because they don't have the education we talked about earlier, they have no other skills to pivot to.
Yeah?
They can't just go get a job in a different industry. So let's trace the life of someone in this data set.
Okay.
They survive the brutal under 5 mortality gauntlet. They miss out entirely on the education system because schools don't exist.
Right.
They go to work in the fields or with the herds because it's their only option, and then a drought hits, wipes out their livelihood, and they have absolutely no safety net. It's just a relentless, crushing cycle of vulnerability.
That is the tragic mechanism at play here. Without an educational foundation, you cannot build a diversified economy. And without a diversified economy, you cannot build resilience against natural shocks.
Now, if you are listening to this, you might be picturing a society that is completely stagnant across the board.
Which is an easy assumption to make.
Exactly, just a monolithic block of economic despair where nothing functions and nothing modernizes. But this is where the data reveals a massive, glaring, almost unbelievable contradiction.
Yes. Slide 10.
Yeah, this specific slide in the presentation compares two very different types of infrastructure, and it completely shattered my assumptions about what is happening on the ground. Let's look at this tale of two infrastructures.
This is perhaps the most fascinating dichotomy in the entire data set, because it proves that the people living inside this system are incredibly dynamic, even if the system itself is broken.
Okay, tell me about the slope graph.
Let's look at the digital telecommunications metric. The dark gray line on the graph shows the data on mobile cellular subscriptions, and it shows explosive, nearly vertical growth.
It's basically a rocket ship.
It soared from near zero to over 60 subscriptions per 100 people.
60 per 100. That means the vast majority of the adult population is walking around with a cellular connection.
Yes, they are digitally connected.
In a country where we just established that 80% of kids aren't in school, they somehow have a booming, modern cellular network.
It is a true technological leapfrog. But then the researcher places that chart directly next to the data on basic sanitation facilities.
The light gray line.
Yes. Access to a safe toilet, sewage management, clean water. This is a matter of basic human survival, disease prevention, and public health.
Right.
And that data shows a flat, agonizingly slow growth curve, covering only about 20% to 44% of the population.
So you have a digital boom on one hand and a sanitation stagnation on the other.
Exactly.
How does that physically happen? How do you have a population with a smartphone in their pocket, capable of connecting to global digital networks, sending mobile money, communicating across borders, but they don't have a safe toilet in their home?
To understand this, we have to look at the mechanics of markets versus public goods. It comes down to excludability.
Excludability. What does that mean in this context?
An excludable good is something a private business can easily stop you from using if you don't pay for it.
Okay, that makes sense.
A cellular connection is highly excludable. A private telecom company can come in, build a cell tower, and sell you a SIM card. If you pay for the prepaid minutes, your phone works.
If you don't pay.
The moment you stop paying, they flip a switch and your signal drops. The company can guarantee their profit. Because of this, private capital finds a way.
Wow.
The telecommunications data proves definitively that there is immense vitality, demand, and entrepreneurial capability within the Somali market. Private businesses can navigate the chaos and deliver a complex service.
Okay, so the market works when it can secure a direct transaction. But why doesn't the market build toilets?
Because a sewage system, a water treatment plant, or a nationwide public school system, those are non-excludable public goods.
Meaning you can't easily cut someone off from the benefits?
Right. You can't easily exclude someone from the benefits of a disease-free neighborhood. If I build a massive sewer system that cleans up the whole street, everyone benefits, even the people who refuse to pay the usage fee.
I see the problem.
Furthermore, building a sanitation system requires massive, long-term capital investment up front. It requires urban planning.
Yeah, you need permits, regulations.
Exactly. It requires the power of taxation to fund it and the legal authority to dig up streets, lay pipes across property lines, and enforce environmental regulations.
A private company can't just show up and start digging up a city without legal permission.
Exactly. Providing non-excludable public goods requires a functioning, legitimate state.
That is such a profound insight. The market can provide the phone, but only the government can provide the sewer.
Precisely.
The people are incredibly adaptable. They are adopting digital technology at breakneck speed, but the state is missing.
The digital leapfrog lands right in a puddle of untreated water.
Which brings us back to the ultimate question of this deep dive, the giant elephant in the room.
The aid money.
Yes! We started by talking about the absolute flood of foreign aid, up to 90% of the national income. If there is all this external money flowing in and private companies can't build the sewers and schools, why can't that massive influx of international aid just be used to build the sanitation systems and the classrooms?
Right. Why is the state missing when there's so much money?
Exactly.
To answer that, we must examine the institutional vacuum. We have to look at the governance metrics, specifically the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI.
And I want to pause right here just to clarify something for you listening. We are looking strictly at the mathematical data here.
Yes, very important point.
The data isn't assigning moral blame to any specific political faction. It's not taking sides. It's not pushing an ideology. We are impartially reporting the governance metrics as measured in this global data set to understand the structural realities.
Absolutely. And looking at the WGI data on slides 11 and 12, the institutional picture is incredibly stark.
Yeah, the horizontal bar charts here are really grim. The warning boxes around the numbers really stand out.
Let's look at the metric for control of corruption. Somalia's percentile rank is consistently at the very bottom globally, sitting in the 0 to 1% range.
Meaning 99% of the countries measured have better control over corruption.
Yes. Furthermore, the Rule of Law Index, which measures the confidence agents have in the rules of society, including the quality of contract enforcement, property rights, the police, and the courts, is deeply entrenched in extreme negative territory.
Okay, what's the actual number?
The valuation hovers around -2.0 to -2.5.
Okay, let's translate that jargon. What does a -2.5 rule of law index actually look like in reality?
It's essentially a total breakdown.
Don't just give me the standard deviation. If I am an aid agency and I have $10 million to build a water treatment plant, what happens when I hit a -2.5 environment?
It means the formal rules of the game simply do not function. To build that water treatment plant, you first need to buy land. But in a -2.5 environment, there is no reliable land registry. You might buy the land, but 3 different local factions with weapons show up claiming they actually own it.
Oh, wow.
And you have no neutral court to go to. Then you need to sign contracts to bring in concrete and steel, but contracts are unenforceable. A supplier might take your money and simply never deliver the materials.
And you can't call the police because the police either don't exist or they work for the supplier.
Exactly. Finally, the WGI metric for political stability and the absence of violence and terrorism also sits at a near 0 percentile rank, again around -2.5.
So even if you somehow manage to build the facility,
you face the constant threat of it being destroyed or commandeered by armed groups. This is what we call the institutional vacuum.
So it's like trying to run the latest, most expensive smartphone operating system on a phone that literally doesn't have a motherboard.
Yes, a perfect analogy.
You can have all the software and the billions of dollars in aid money, but without the hardware, the rule of law, the property rights, the security, that money has nowhere to execute. It just crashes.
That is exactly it. You cannot keep a school open, pay the teachers a reliable salary, and ensure the students are safe if the institutional bedrock doesn't exist.
The foundation just isn't there.
Rampant corruption acts as a massive funnel, draining resources away from their intended targets long before a single brick is laid. The aid money comes in, it hits the vacuum, and it dissipates.
This brings us to the core synthesis of the entire presentation. Slide 13.
The causal loop diagram.
Yes, the researcher who compiled this data pulls all these threads together into what they call the causal loop of fragility. All these data points we've discussed, the economics, the demographics, the lack of schools, the agriculture, the corruption, they aren't just isolated problems.
No, they're deeply interconnected.
They are gears in a machine that feeds itself.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that loop. It starts with the influx of money. External aid pours into the country. Okay. But because it enters an institutional vacuum, characterized by high corruption and a lack of rule of law, that aid cannot be converted into long-term infrastructure or public schools, it is either consumed immediately as imports or siphoned off.
So the first consequence, the money fails to build the schools.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the schools aren't built, that massive, explosive population growth, the youth bulge we discussed, matures into adulthood without basic literacy or numeracy.
The second consequence.
Yeah.
The lost generations formed.
Exactly. Because they lack education, they are fundamentally locked out of a modern, diversified economy. They cannot build a service sector or an industrial base.
Right.
So they are forced into vulnerable, fragile labor, primarily subsistence agriculture.
The third consequence. They are trapped in a fragile, climate-dependent livelihood.
Because they are relying on vulnerable labor and natural conditions, they are constantly subjected to devastating economic shocks, like severe droughts.
Which wipes out everything. Yes. This deepens extreme poverty at the household level. And as desperate populations fight over scarce resources, water, grazing land, political instability and conflict are exacerbated.
The fourth consequence. The instability deepens.
And because the poverty and instability are deepening, the international community looks at the crisis and responds the only way it knows how.
By triggering the need for even more external financial and humanitarian aid.
Exactly.
And the loop closes. The cycle starts all over again. The new aid goes in, hits the vacuum, gets siphoned off, fails to build the schools, the uneducated youth grow up vulnerable, poverty deepens, conflict rises, and we send more aid.
It is a terrifying mathematical loop.
It is structurally self-perpetuating. The system is designed to maintain its own fragility.
Yes, the loop feeds itself.
So if you are listening to this and you've ever wondered why certain global crises seem to last for decades despite billions of dollars in intervention, this loop is why.
It explains the whole paradox.
It means that throwing money at a systemic problem without having a foundational bucket to hold that money is mathematically doomed to fail. We have been trying to fill a bucket that literally doesn't have a bottom.
The old model of simply writing checks for economic aid, what we might call survival maintenance, is fundamentally broken in this context.
It just treats the symptoms.
Exactly. It might buy a bag of food that keeps someone alive for a week, which is obviously important from a humanitarian perspective, but it completely ignores the structural disease.
But we can't just leave it at despair. We can't just look at this loop and say, well, it's impossible, let's give up.
No, absolutely not.
The data has to point to a solution, a reframing of the entire paradigm. How do you break a loop that is this deeply entrenched?
The data does offer a way out, and you see this on slide 14 with the side-by-side comparison.
Right, the gray box with an X versus the dark gray box with a check mark.
Exactly. It requires a massive paradigm shift from both international policymakers and domestic leaders. The conclusion of this data framework is that the priority must shift away from pure economic aid, which turns into immediate consumption, and move entirely toward state building and capacity construction.
State building.
Yeah.
Which is so much harder, so much slower, and let's be honest, way less glamorous than just announcing $1 billion aid package on the evening news.
Oh, without a doubt.
You can't take a photo op with a functioning contract enforcement law.
No, you can't. It requires extreme patience. The data identifies two absolute, non-negotiable pillars for this state-building effort. If you want to break the loop, you have to start here.
Okay, what are the pillars?
The first pillar is transparent institutional building specifically, establishing the rule of law and anti-corruption mechanisms. You have to build the hardware.
Right.
The second pillar is the massive universal expansion of basic primary education. You have to install the software.
And the really beautiful thing about this analysis is that the data already proved the society is capable of rapid modernization.
Yes. We don't have to guess if the population can handle it.
We just have to look back at the cell phones.
That is the beacon of hope in this entire data set. The mobile phone data proves definitively that the Somali people possess incredible market vitality, entrepreneurial spirit, and technological adaptability.
They figure it out.
They do. The international community doesn't need to micromanage the economy. They don't need to build the businesses or invent the industries.
The people will do that themselves.
Yes, the government just needs to provide the public goods that the private market structurally cannot provide. Knowledge in the form of schools, and rules in the form of courts.
It's that simple, yet that incredibly difficult.
If you provide a safe environment where contracts are honored, and you provide a population that can read and do math, the people will build the rest.
They already built a highly complex nationwide digital network in a complete governance vacuum. Imagine what that same entrepreneurial energy could build with a stable foundation. You have to fix the bucket before you turn on the hose. Rebuilding a nation means you must first rebuild its people and its institutions. Everything else is just an illusion of growth.
It's a sobering analysis, but it's a deeply necessary one. If we actually want to move beyond the paradox of aid dependency, we have to look at the mechanics, not just the money.
We really do. We've gone on an incredible journey through this data today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started with that mind-bending paradox on slide 1. How a country can receive up to 90% of its income from foreign aid, yet have an economy where the per capita wealth flatlines.
Right.
We looked at the demographic pressure cooker of a population where nearly half are children, creating an invisible tax on the working adult. We saw the tragic human capital crisis, the shocking maternal mortality rates, and the reality of a lost generation with 80% of kids out of school.
The human cost is just immense.
It is. We examined how that lack of education traps the labor market in vulnerable, climate-dependent agriculture.
If they can build a digital revolution in an institutional vacuum, imagine the economic and cultural powerhouse they could become with simply a functioning school system and a stable rule of law.
That changes how you look at the numbers completely. It's not just a statistic of what they're missing out on. It's a statistic of what the entire world is missing out on from them.
Exactly right.
You can't just hook a system up to an IV drip of cash and expect it to get strong. You have to heal the underlying structure. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to question the surface-level narratives you hear about global development, look past the big dollar announcements, and always look for the structural realities beneath the numbers. Until next time.